next issue that we're going to look at now is issues in society that shape the profession of social work. So now we're making a shift. So if you think about the profession of social work, what are some of the issues that shape that profession? This is one of the things that you are going to encounter throughout the course. So we are giving you some kind of highlight there to understand what it is. So the first thing here is increased institutionalization of social welfare services and programs, which I just finished talking about. Increased institutionalization means the services of social welfare are now not provided in random. What do I mean by random? Random means anybody can get into that. Like if I feel like I want to start some program to help some disadvantaged people, I can just create the organization and just start doing that. Okay? In the past, this may have been the case, but today, because of the institutionalization of social welfare services, I have to register with the government, and the government has to license me or permit me to do that, and they would give me certain criteria. They would say you have to adhere to this, and that, and I have to show clear accountability of the finances and all those kind of things, okay? So, in other words, the increased institutionalization of social welfare, in the sense that now there are organizations that are established, and there are established procedures for carrying out social work or implementing social policies. This has shaped the training of social work, because we need people who are trained and professionals in that area. Okay, then second, the tension between social work addressing social injustice in society or trying to help clients address their present challenges. So what does this mean? Sometimes in the profession of social work, the tension that professional social workers face is that, are you going to just help people cope with their problems, like the clients? Are you just going to help them make suffering sufferable? Making suffering sufferable means you are helping them to cope with their pain, but you are not fundamentally changing the situation, but you are just helping them to cope with it, okay? So on the other hand, some people would say, what social workers really need to do is not to make suffering sufferable or to help their clients just cope, but to look at the cause of the injustice in their lives and change it. So what does that mean? Let me give you an example to illustrate this. At Bethel University, we have a lake called Lake Johanna, very, very close to the university. So assuming we know that some people drink water from that lake, and then when they drink the water, they get sick, okay? So, but we decide that in order to help these people who are sick, we're going to be building more hospitals and train more nurses and things like that, or make more drugs, so that when people go and drink the water and they get sick, we can help them cope with life because they can have access to all these services, okay? That's one way to cope with that, to cope with the situation. But the other way to cope with that is to say, what is the reason why there is some poison in Lake Johanna, okay? Let's go to the lake and see what is the problem there, and let's solve the problem so that in the future, if people drink the water there, they're not going to get sick. That doesn't mean that it is wrong to create more hospitals or train more nurses and things like that. But the point is, there's a choice there. You can pursue both, or you might decide to emphasize one. So social workers sometimes experience tension in their profession. Are they going to engage in the struggle for social justice to transform society in terms of the causes of the problems they are trying to address? Or are they just going to help the clients, the people who are victims, who are poor and needy, just cope, making suffering sufferable? I would like you to think about that, but this is something that every social worker would confront or would deal with in his or her practice. And then three, the poor laws and its distinction between those that deserve help and those that do not. So if you are a social worker, you're going to find out that sometimes when we are implementing social policies or social welfare programs, we make a distinction between poor people who deserve help. I have made reference to that a little bit before. They deserve help because they are not stupid, they are not ignorant, they are not irresponsible. Maybe they are doing an honest job and then they had an accident, now they become disabled. Or they are driving very carefully and then somebody probably was drunk and then crashed their car on theirs and then now they are disabled, okay? So those kind of people, people who are not would be considered as if they are responsible, they just fall into this. So they need something, they need help, but they are considered to be deserving. But there are people who are just kind of like irresponsible, as we shall see, as you will see throughout this course. One of the major problems in the U.S. in terms of how needy people are perceived is when people are alcoholic, they are considered to be irresponsible, and the social welfare system doesn't seem to have much sympathy for those kind of people because they are just considered to be irresponsible. Okay, and then next, the fourth, the significance that society attached to nurturing children, their potentials in society, and its implication for social welfare policies and programs. One of the things you're going to notice very important, that is very important in the study of U.S. social welfare history, policies, and programs is that even though sometimes we may be unkind to people who are adults, but when it comes to children, there's a way we have some special compassion on them. And there are several reasons why this may be the case. Remember that the child that is born today, in 18 years, he or she would be the one to be in college. So if some people do not decide to have children today, there will be no college students in 18 years or something like that, okay? So the decision to have a child is not just a private decision, it has public implications. And then our social security system is based on the assumption that you work and you pay your social security taxes, and then some people take some money out of it, money is taken out of that and paid to people who are elderly. With the assumption that you too, when you come and retire, there will be a lot of people working and they will continue to pay these social security taxes, and then you will be paid. So if we do not have young people who are trained, educated, who can work productively to pay these social security taxes, you can see that we're going to be, as a society, in crisis in the future. So in other words, even if I am not the person who owns the child, if you understand our system, I should have a vested interest in the mom and dad somewhere in the United States who have decided to have a child and struggling very hard to raise that child, because the labor of that child is going to contribute to the social security that I will benefit when I am really retired. So I think when you look at the way we perceive children, the way we think they are innocent, there's a way we think they are innocent, they deserve to be taken care of, there's a way our policies have really focused on making their lives really different. So that's what I'm really trying to say here. Now, if you go to some societies where this is not the case, I grew up in northern Nigeria, and when you go there, you see a lot of children just roaming the streets. Okay, they don't have, they are begging sometimes, and they do that every day. And it's just kind of like part of the normal life. Okay, now I know even in Nigeria there are people who are unhappy with that, but this is a reality. But I think in the United States, if this was to happen, some people would just feel offended. It will offend their sensibility, even if the children are not their own children, okay? So this has some impact on our public policy or social policy programs. And then next 5, the changing status of women as a watershed issue in U.S. welfare history, e.g. the question of when women became free to work outside the home like men. As part of the study of social welfare history, one of the things that you're going to confront or deal with, or one of the things that has shaped the discussion, is the status of women and their rights. Okay? We discussed that a little bit when we discussed types of equality, ontological equality. We said that at one point women were considered to be human, but when it comes to the nature of their existence, some people felt that they were subordinate to men. So that was for a very long time. For a long time ago, women did not have the right to vote. In some cases, they did not have the right to own property and all those kind of things, okay? So, but gradually, these things really changed, and women even got the right to work outside the home. There was a time when women did not have the right to go to school just like any other person. If you read the work of Horace Mann on what he called Common School in Massachusetts, he was concerned about creating an opportunity for all people to be educated. And he felt public education is the way we reduce equality, the way we create American identity, whether you are from the rich family or black family or minority family like Asian or Latinx. When children go to school, they develop this common identity, that they have a common identity called being an American, okay? But even at that time, you find out that I believe it was only Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was one of the founding fathers that felt at least women should be educated to a certain level, but when they get that education, they should go back home. Many of the founding fathers did not feel women should even get an education. Okay, so this whole question of the redefinition of the status of women, the struggle, I don't have the time to get into that, but remember that after women got the right to vote, they thought that was going to be it, and then later on in the 1960s also, they realized that even when they had the right to vote, there was still certain harassment or discrimination that were taking place in the workplace, in professions and things like that, and women had to organize another kind of like struggle again there. So that's another thing that has shaped social welfare history, this whole question of the status of women. When women started to work outside the home, as we know now, women have the right to work outside the home, okay? It created a caring gap. What is a caring gap? A caring gap is that generally women are the people who take care of the children, they take care of the elderly. I'm not saying that there are no men who do that, but generally you are going to find out that women are the people who do a lot of that. So now that women started working outside the home, it became a serious crisis. Who is going to take care of the things that need to be done within the house, within the family? Now, they say this author, Ali Hochschild, wrote a book titled The Second Shift. In this book, The Second Shift, what she simply means is that when women started working outside the home, when they work outside the home, that would be the first shift in the day. They wake up, they dress, they go out and work outside the home. But when they come back home, do not assume that that first shift is the end of it. When they come back home, again, they have to do a second shift. That second shift means taking care of the children, maybe cooking, maybe doing this. A lot of domestic things women do a lot of domestic things, okay? Now, Ali Hochschild visited many families. She stayed with them just to observe what's happening. She found out that even families that call themselves egalitarian, which means they emphasize equality, you may hear the husband saying, oh, you need to come and change the diaper or something like that, which means even though they are all equal or something like that, but when there's something the baby's diaper needs to be changed, the husband sometimes call the mom to do that. Now, of course, when Ali Hochschild wrote that book, it was quite some time. Maybe things have changed now. But the point I'm just trying to say here is just that it overwhelmed women because they have to go and do the first shift outside, and then they come and do the second shift. That's why she named the book The Second Shift. Okay. 7. Economic crisis such as the 2008 recession and the conundrum associated with it. So what I mean by the conundrum is the challenge. When there's an economic crisis like the 2008 Great Recession, the mortgage crisis, the problem, subprime mortgage crisis, the problem with that is, should the government spend more in order to help the poor or disadvantaged? If the government does that, how is it going to get the money? It means it will spend more than it is generating. That will lead to something called deficit, budget deficit. And budget deficit is not considered to be something good by some economists and people in the general public. But if the government does not increase spending, okay, it's going to really affect the lives of so many people. Because people are in serious problems and you just ignore them because you want to maintain a balanced budget. Okay, so the crisis that this kind of thing generates, the 2008 Great Recession, is that should the government just remain within its budget in spite of the fact that people are suffering, or should the government spend more than it is generating in order to help the poor or disadvantaged people, which then would lead to budget deficit? This is a debate that is still going on in the United States, and maybe not just in the United States, but in many other countries as well. Because sometimes it means the government will have to borrow money from other sources. Okay, and then 8, initial concern for elderly people in U.S. welfare policies focus primarily on elderly white males only. So if you check the social welfare history, you're going to find out that the debate actually started, or the focus initially was on white males. Okay? But the advantage is that once something started with the white males, then gradually people begin to put pressure on the government or the system to apply it to other people as well, okay? So, but initially, many of the policies related to social welfare programs are more focused on white males. Okay, and then apart from that, there's also the whole question of the privileges and priority that veterans have in American social welfare policy. So when you look at American social welfare policy or programs, the veterans have a lot of advantage. There are many programs that the veterans have which other Americans do not have. But the advantage of that, of course we know that the veterans deserve that, but the advantage of even the veterans deserving that, experiencing that or having those kind of services that are initially focused on them is that once they exist and they are functioning very well, they become a source of inspiration for some people trying to reform the society to say, well, since this thing has worked among the veterans, why don't we extend it to other people? Okay? So, but initially, or as it exists today, the veterans tend to have far higher priority service in terms of social welfare programs. And then U.S. history has forced minorities, especially blacks, in a situation where they face many vulnerabilities and risk in the market economy because of race and class, etc. So what does this mean? What we are saying here is just that there's a way in which we rely so much in the market in this country. Remember the welfare reform of 1996 tend to make it difficult for people to stay on welfare for a very long time or something like that. Now, nobody will deny that there are people in every society who are lazy, okay? I don't think, yes, you're going to find out. Even in ancient civilization, there are people who would be considered lazy. But what happens is that, as we discuss when we discuss the different types of equality, when you study the history of, say, for instance, black people or Native Americans, sometimes you feel really sorry because of things. So you start with slavery. After the Civil War, we had another kind of new slavery under Jim Crow. Not before Jim Crow, we had this kind of agricultural system where the black people were just kind of like renting land from the white people now, and they have to pay a certain amount or whatever. So literally they are just kind of engaged in new kind of slavery, even though they are free people, but they do not have the land. They have to rent it from sharecropping, they call it, or something like that. Okay, so, but then after that, then Jim Crow. Jim Crow means segregation. Okay, so Jim Crow then ended with the Civil Rights Act or whatever, and Brown versus Board of Education. So by around the 1960s, you had the Civil Rights Act. 1964, Fair Housing Act, I think, I don't know whether it was 1968 or something like that. Voters Act, sometimes around 1965. Somewhere around the 1960s, there were many laws that were passed to help black people, okay? And then you have Lyndon Johnson, the welfare, the war on poverty, and all those kind of things. But so between 1964 and 1965, there was this great opportunity, affirmative action, this and that, and all those kind of things. But if you check very well, you are going to find out that as we are getting close to the 1970s, already things started changing. People started complaining about reverse discrimination. Black people are receiving this, black people are receiving that. So then the United States government then introduced certain policies from the 1970s onwards that started dismantling the welfare state, dismantling it. And this became effective in 1996. So the little window of opportunity that many black people had was just between 1965 to around 1970 or whatever. After that, America was becoming more like a kind of Wild West when it comes to competition. You have to this. And these policies have actually impacted many white families, not just blacks. The only reason why black people became a serious issue of concern is because of what we call cumulative disadvantage. Cumulative disadvantage means we can trace back disadvantage in these people's life for generations. There's a difference between somebody whose family, like 3 generations, have been marginalized, okay, compared to somebody whose family was relatively doing well, but probably they just fall into some kind of disadvantage or something like that, okay? So, so you have to deal with race and you have to deal with class. What do I mean by race and class? There are times when Henry Louis Gates wrote, he produced a documentary film called about two communities in the African American community, okay? And in the documentary, the interesting thing about that is Henry Louis Gates is a professor at Harvard University. And always when he's going to his office, there's this other black man who is almost his age, who is begging by the side of the street. And they greet each other, they know each other. And that's where the documentary really kind of like starts. So they're all black, okay? Okay, they're all black, more or less from the same generation. But here is somebody who's begging by the side of the street, and they know each other. And then Henry Louis gets getting into his office at Harvard University, okay? So the point here is that this is a question of class. Even though they are all black, but you consider because Henry Louis Gates, because he has achieved a lot in terms of education, whatever he's doing really very well. That doesn't mean that he may not experience some racial discrimination or whatever here and there or something like that, but at least he's doing very well, okay? So the point we're making here is that there's a distinction between the issue of race and the issue of class, okay? Oprah Winfrey would not have to worry about money. In terms of class, she's a very wealthy woman, okay? But that doesn't mean that racially somebody will not treat her one way or the other, okay? Many reform policies and programs. And then before I proceed, still about the question of blacks, one of the things that black people have struggled with is that many of the U.S. welfare policies have tried to kind of argue that like black people are quote unquote irresponsible. And so you should try as much as possible not to give them certain services because that would help them to become more disciplined because they're irresponsible or something like that. Okay? So that's why they have been denied certain services. The problem with that line of reasoning is that you cannot understand somebody's behavior by just looking at him or her just the way they are. I, for instance, grew up really, really poor. I did not start wearing shoes, and I started wearing rubber shoes until I was in my teens. I was walking barefooted, okay? So I have an experience of that. So when you grow up in poverty, it affects your even capacity to aspire to imagine something you can do with your life. But most people do not understand how those kind of contexts can really have some impact on somebody's life. We just look at the behavior of the persons now. Now, that doesn't mean that the person should not be responsible, but what I'm just trying to say is just that if you really want to understand someone's behavior, like I teach, but I'm not just going to look at the behavior of a student in the class and just judge him that way. I try to understand broadly what is really happening in the person's life. And maybe then the behavior in the class is just a reflection of a larger problem in society. Okay, next is the issue of many reform policies and programs to help minorities who are not pursued with strong political will. So what does this mean? This is not just kind of social policies and programs to help minorities, but to be frank with you, even white families that are needy. The point here is that we have the money in the United States to do a lot of things. Like sometimes when you hear stories about how people struggle with healthcare, and given the wealth we have in this country, I don't know. I don't know how people really think about that, okay? And sometimes we want to feel like we tend to confuse between access and affordability, or availability and affordability. For instance, in the United States, we have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. But when it comes to affordability, it's something different, okay? I remember there was a time when Mayo Clinic in Minnesota here, in Rochester, ran through financial problems. It had a budget deficit. They announced it over the Minnesota Public Radio. But then amazingly, one prince from Saudi Arabia came and stayed there for either a month or so, and they announced over the public radio that the Mayo Clinic in Rochester has now balanced its budget. Why? Because the guy has money. You see, in the United States, we do not discriminate between the dollars that people from other countries bring here to spend and the dollars that we have, okay? I'm here, there are Americans probably who are needing something to eat, but there are people who are going to arrive at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport who are not American citizens. But because they have the money to spend the real dollar that we have, they will be driven from the airport in a Rolls Royce, go and get any classic food in the restaurant and eat or whatever in the hotel, while there are Americans. So the issue I'm just trying to draw your attention here is that our problem in the United States is not that we don't have the education, we have all the talents, we have all the resources, we have the money or whatever. But there's something about the way we think that has made a lot of our people to really suffer, not only minorities in this case, because we don't have the political will. Political will means the determination that we're not just writing this in the book, but we're determined to make sure that we achieve it, we realize it, that the lives of these people are really transformed.